PatrickTurner is NATO's senior representative in Ukraine. Welcome to our program, Mr. Turner.
Good to see you.
I would like to begin with your visit to Lviv. What is your aim of the visit, and did you enjoy the city today?
So it's first of all to say it's a fantastic city. I've had some time to look around. A very good local historian showed me around the city on Sunday, so that was fantastic. But the aim of the visit, I was invited by the mayor, whom I met last autumn shortly after I arrived in Ukraine, and he kindly invited me to visit. So I had some time to talk with him, his deputy, very good conversations, and then to be able to visit unbroken medical facilities, meet with veterans organizations, go and see part of the very, very impressive defense technology cluster. And then we'll also be, I'll be visiting some defense institutions, some academy, some training facilities. So, you know, there are a lot of relevant facilities for us in this area. But anyway, it's a wonderful city. I'm not going to start doing a comparison between Lviv and Kyiv, because that would be a loser's game. But it's a fabulous city. I will certainly be back.
Let's cover also your new role as a NATO senior representative in Ukraine. It's a new role for Ukraine, for NATO. What are your main responsibilities and your current tasks in your role as a NATO senior representative?
Yes, so NATO's had a presence in Ukraine in various forms for over 25 years. So we've had a presence and a relationship with Ukraine for a long time. So the presence is not new, but it was decided almost a year ago that we would raise the level of the head of the representation, but also raise the scale of the representation. So I was previously an Assistant Secretary General in NATO, working in Brussels in the headquarters for 7 years in 2 different roles. So this is a position at that same level. So that was part of a set of decisions on really strengthening the relationship between NATO and Ukraine. So the role involves heading the team. So the team since last year has roughly trebled in size. It will grow somewhat further this year. It's a team which is both international and local. So about 2/3 of the staff are local, very good local team with people. Some of the people have been here a long time representing NATO and really know the system. So heading the team, representing in Ukraine all of the elements of cooperation between NATO and Ukraine, talking across to colleagues right across the Ukrainian government, but also working closely with colleagues back in Brussels in the NATO headquarters. So it's a two-way representation. You know, a little bit like it would be if you were a bilateral embassy. But I would say we'll get further into the areas of cooperation, but the relationship between NATO and Ukraine is the strongest it has ever been, and there's a huge agenda between the 2 countries, and the relationship's very important for NATO, it's very important for Ukraine.
And how do you see the main reasons behind this decision to create a new role, NATO senior representative in Ukraine, which was created last year?
It was part of a package of measures which were agreed during last year, including at the last NATO summit in Washington. And it was really an expression of the central importance for NATO of this relationship, of the cooperation with Ukraine, of Ukraine being as successful as it can be on the battlefield, the needs of Ukraine and the importance of Ukrainian security for NATO members, and the wish of NATO members to assist Ukraine. So it was part of a package, and you know, at the top of the list in that package, very important in that package, was an undertaking made at the last summit that NATO allies would spend at least 40 billion euros on military assistance for Ukraine in 2024. And in fact, they exceeded that target. It was over 50 billion euros, and significant assistance will be provided this year, will be provided in the years to come.
And from your perspective, how do you see your main priorities in your new role right now?
So I think the political relationship is very important. So we have something called the NATO-Ukraine Council and a number of committees. So that's a opportunity for Ukraine and NATO in Brussels to discuss a range of political and other issues. So defence-related issues, the provision of security reform issues. So there's a big political role, and obviously we're in the middle of very significant political events here, international political events. So the political relationship between NATO and Ukraine is important. And in the past, at the senior level, if I make a military comparison, the NATO presence was headed, say, at colonel level. I'm not military myself. I'm a civilian, a defence civilian, but now we have an Assistant Secretary General level representation, which is like the equivalent of in military terms of a general. So we have somebody here, that's myself, my successor, whenever that may happen, who can relate to almost any level of the Ukrainian government from day to day as needed, whereas in the past we were relying just on visits in both directions. So there are still obviously lots of contacts between the Secretary General and President Zelensky in person and on the phone, plenty of contacts between the Foreign Minister, the Defence Minister and colleagues in NATO and amongst allies, but having somebody here on the ground. So that is one thing. And then on another couple of specifics, one, I think it will be very important as we go ahead in the next few years to help Ukraine think about the strategy towards its defence capabilities for the future, whether there is an early peace settlement or not. It is clear that Ukraine will need to have now and in the future very, very significant defence capabilities. It's shown incredible resolve and capability, and it's done that with significant assistance from allies. That will be needed in the future. So I think that will be an important file. And then it continues to be the case that assisting Ukraine and working with Ukraine in a variety of other areas, which we can go into in more detail, will be really important, but including on reform. And I would say it's also the case that more and more allies want to learn from Ukraine. So you've learnt in a very hard, tough way lessons from the battlefield, for example, which allies themselves need to learn. And some of the innovation, so I've seen some very impressive innovation here, both in Lviv and elsewhere in Ukraine, and sharing that innovation, exchanging ideas, working together on projects will be more and more important.
You just mentioned about the personal contacts between President Zelensky and NATO Secretary General. From your perspective, what kind of role do these personal contacts play in supporting Ukraine? Because President Zelensky usually has this phone call with NATO Secretary General during another, after important summits, meetings, before, after, for example, conversations with international leaders, with US President Donald Trump. What do these personal contacts mean for Ukraine?
I think personal contacts are extremely important, and personal relationships are very important. trust is very important. Willingness really to listen in both directions. What I've seen of the relationship, and I've sat in a number of meetings, listened to a number of phone calls. I think the relationship is a very good, very strong, and very important one. This is a time when relationships matter. I think the Secretary General also has a very strong personal relationship with President Trump, with other NATO leaders, and that matters a great deal. And I think President Zelensky's willingness to say very clearly, we are willing to have a full immediate ceasefire is an important thing.
And also NATO Secretary General is always making the case why it is important to support Ukraine. What does it mean for Ukrainian global affairs from your perspective?
So NATO is going to have another summit in The Hague next month, in a little bit more than a month's time. NATO summits are often important events, but that is certainly going to be an important event. A key decision at that summit, which is related both to the security of NATO allies and certainly Ukraine, will be a decision on defence spending by NATO allies. At the moment, NATO allies have a target of spending at least 2% of their national wealth each year on defence. So that target will be raised significantly. I'm not going to make a forecast by how much, but a significant increase. And I think there will also be agreement on having a target for defence-related expenditure, for example, on resilience or relevant infrastructure. So NATO, non-US NATO allies spend roughly $500 billion a year, dollars a year on defence. So raising that target significantly would add potentially several hundred billion a year. You've heard Germany talking about being willing to spend an extra $500 billion. You've heard the EU saying it would be willing to use its instruments to enable the spending of another 800 million. So that's a very big thing, and that is of direct relevance, both for allies, for their defence, but also for their ability in the long term to continue providing support to Ukraine. So as I say, in 2024, that support was over 50 billion euros. So that's subject one. A related subject, so part of that commitment to doing more on defence is defence industry. So it's clear, the Secretary General has been making it very clear that it will be necessary to raise defence industrial production rates of production, innovation, collaboration between partners and between allies and partners in defence industry, and that applies on both sides of the Atlantic. So Russia in 3 months, on some estimates, produces as much ammunition as NATO does in a year. So, that is not a satisfactory state of affairs. So we need to improve on that. And that connects to what is happening here. So it's been interesting, both in Kyiv and Lviv, hearing and seeing the increase in defence industrial capacity here. So I think it's gone from about $1 billion worth of production capacity 3 years ago to the estimate that I've heard is $35 billion of capacity in Ukraine in 2025. So I think working together between Ukraine and allies in that area will be really important benefit for both, so joint ventures. And then, as I already said, the ability to sustain defence assistance to Ukraine, that commitment from a year ago to at least 40 billion, something like that commitment going forward for this year, and being able to sustain it in future years will be important. And if there is that commitment to growing defence expenditure, then that will be achievable.
You just mentioned about the capacity of military-industrial base of NATO members countries. Do you see this political willingness to do more, but not only to do more little, to do more significantly, to also support Ukraine and its military-industrial base? Do you see this as a real game changer, or just some political postures, political statements?
No, I think if you listen to the kind of statements that a number of NATO allies have been making, a number of leaders have been making, the commitments on defence spending, on defence capabilities, on forces. So, to have stronger defence, you need to spend more, you need more capabilities, you need more production capacity, you need more people, you need more material. So all of these things, and I think the kinds of statements that you've been hearing in recent months make it very clear that there is a strong political will to, as you say, to change the game. And I would say part of changing the game is a stronger collaboration between NATO allies and Ukraine. And I think there is a will to do that, and we need to make sure we make the most of the opportunities, and that's work both for NATO allies and for Ukraine, but work together, and it will be in both the interests to do that.
And do you see the transatlantic unity between the US and other European members of NATO? Because there have been different signals from the United States, and it also would be important to have this unity to invest in military-industrial base.
Mm-hmm. I've heard people saying that the US is somehow not committed to NATO or not committed to assisting with the defence of Europe. And the Secretary General has said very clearly, US leaders have said very clearly, President Trump and all of his national security team have made very clear, said repeatedly, that they're committed to the collective defence promise, which is at the heart of NATO, the Article 5 commitment to defend each other. So that is clear. And no US leader has been saying we're just planning to withdraw from Europe. It is always possible under any US administration that there will be adjustments in US forces in Europe. That's a normal process. But what the US has been saying clearly, and it's a perfectly fair request and demand, is that there is a real rebalancing between the amount of effort that Europe makes in its own defence and the US contribution to transatlantic security. And we are confident that that rebalancing will take place. That will be to the benefit of Europe, to the benefit of Ukraine, to the benefit of the US. So it's the right thing to be doing, and that is at the heart of what will happen, including at the summit, but also in the coming years. And that, I believe, will also be of benefit to Ukraine. But I think you'll find that a number of allies and NATO itself are interested in the question of Ukraine's own capacities, both its defence forces, but also its defence industry.
And do you see this big trust, this trust between allies remains also between United States and European allies in working together to strengthen NATO and its borders?
So I think you've seen allies working together, including in the context of the discussions about moving towards a ceasefire and a settlement here. You've seen allies working together very effectively. So, if you like, transatlantic cooperation, but also both transatlantic and cooperation between those allies and Ukraine. And I'm confident that that will continue. I would say that allies are grateful for President Trump's leadership.
And also let's cover Ukraine's aspiration to join NATO. This topic, is it still on the table right now, as we hear different statements, different decisions could be made during negotiations?
So I think that the position is that it remains as it has been stated by NATO in the past, that NATO allies expect that Ukraine will join NATO. That is the case, but it is also the case that it was never stated that Ukraine would join NATO as part of a peace settlement, if a peace settlement comes about. So I refer back to what has been said actually in the last two NATO summits, that Ukraine will join NATO when allies agree and when conditions allow, and that position is unchanged. And I go back to saying, actually, in practice, in terms of the real relationship, in terms of real cooperation, mutual cooperation and assistance from NATO allies to Ukraine, but also benefits that Ukraine gives to NATO allies, the relationship has never been closer or stronger. So you've got 50 billion in assistance last year. You've got the establishment of a training and support and training command in Germany, which coordinates the provision of equipment and training. You've got the Joint Analysis Training and Education Centre recently established in Poland, in Bydgoszcz, which is taking lessons learnt from the war, both military ones and civil ones, including, for example, in the area of resilience, learning them together. And in both of those institutions, the command and the centre, and that's the first centre, the one in Poland is the first centre with a partner. In both places, you've got strong Ukrainian teams working closely, so they're really joint enterprises. And then you've got, a set of other areas where we're working together. We have a comprehensive assistance package fund for non-lethal equipment, both urgent assistance, but also longer-term projects, capacity building. We've got a program of moving towards greater interoperability between Ukraine and NATO. So at all kinds of levels, political and military, short-term, long-term, urgent, strategic, we are doing more, and we will be doing more.
Thank you, Mr. Turner, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, for your work, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel.